The thunder of hooves against hard-packed earth faded as Lillian Wells pulled her mare to a stop at the edge of the cliff, mesmerized by the vast expanse of untamed wilderness that stretched before her. The Montana Territory of 1876 was a place of wild beauty and harsh realities. But in that moment, with the late afternoon sun casting golden light across the rugged landscape, Lillian saw only freedom. "Just look at that view, Pepper," she murmured to her chestnut mare, reaching down to pat the horse's sleek neck. "Father would have a fit if he knew I'd ridden this far from town alone." At 22, Lillian had long since grown tired of the constraints placed upon her as the daughter of a prosperous banker in the growing settlement of Silver Creek. Ever since her mother's passing 5 years prior, her father had become increasingly protective, attempting to mold her into the proper lady who would make a suitable match with one of the town's eligible bachelors. But Lillian had other ideas about her future, and none of them involved being trapped in a loveless marriage of convenience. She dismounted, letting Pepper graze on the sparse mountain grass while she walked closer to the edge, breathing in the crisp autumn air. The mountains called to her with their mysterious valleys and hidden places no one had explored. This particular trail was one she'd discovered on her own, far from the usual paths traveled by the townspeople. A flutter of movement caught her eye, an eagle soaring above the valley below. Lillian smiled, following its graceful flight. In her distraction, she failed to notice the subtle vibration beneath her boots. The first warning came too late, a sound like distant thunder growing louder by the second. She turned just as the ground began to shift. Horror dawned as she realized what was happening. The ledge was giving way. Lillian scrambled backward, but the motion only hastened the collapse. Pepper whinnied in alarm, backing away from the danger as the earth crumbled beneath Lillian's feet. "No." She cried out as she fell, tumbling with the cascade of rocks and dirt down the steep slope. Pain exploded through her body as she rolled, unable to stop her descent. A large boulder crashed beside her, missing her head by inches but pinning her lower body in a sickening instant of pressure and agony. The world went silent save for the settling of dust and pebbles. Lillian lay stunned, her vision blurring as she tried to comprehend what had happened. The weight on her legs was immense, crushing. When she attempted to move, white-hot pain shot through her, forcing a strangled scream from her throat. Dust coated her tongue as she gasped for breath. The eagle was gone, the sky now seeming impossibly far away. Her horse's frightened whinny sounded distant, though Lillian knew Pepper would soon bolt back toward town without her. "Help," she called, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. The realization of her predicament sank in with terrifying clarity. She was miles from town, pinned beneath rocks, with night approaching and no one knowing where she'd gone. As consciousness began to slip away, Lillian thought she heard the rhythmic beat of hooves. A hallucination, surely. No one used this trail. No one would find her here. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a silhouette against the burning sky, a man on horseback, racing toward the devastation. Yorick Montgomery pulled hard on his stallion's reins when he spotted the fresh rockslide ahead. The dark-haired cowboy had been tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on his employer's cattle when the distant sound of the earth giving way caught his attention. Years of living in these mountains had taught him to recognize the dangerous sounds of nature. "Whoa, thunder," he commanded, bringing his black stallion to a halt at a safe distance from the disturbed ground. His keen eyes scanned the area, noting the fresh scar on the mountainside where the ledge had collapsed. A flash of movement, a riderless horse pacing nervously near where the trail should have been caused him to stiffen. "Someone's in trouble," he muttered, dismounting swiftly. He approached cautiously, aware that the ground might still be unstable. The chestnut mare shied away from him, but Yorick could see the fine quality of the saddle. Not a working horse then. His heart raced as he peered over the edge of what remained of the trail. Among the fallen rocks and debris, a splash of blue fabric caught his eye. "Hello down there," he called, already reaching for the rope coiled at his saddle. "Can you hear me?" Silence answered him, but Yorick wasn't deterred. Securing his rope to Thunder's saddle, he began a careful descent down the slope, testing each foothold before committing his weight. The scene that greeted him at the bottom made his blood run cold. A young woman lay motionless, her lower body trapped beneath a boulder that would take several men to move. Her face, though smudged with dirt and blood, was peaceful in unconsciousness, framed by honey-blonde hair that had come loose from its pins. Yorick knelt beside her, gently brushing debris from her face. "Miss, can you hear me?" He pressed his fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. For a heart-stopping moment he felt nothing, but then there it was. Faint but present. "Thank God," he breathed, relief washing over him, but the danger was far from past. The woman was badly injured, trapped, and the sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains. Soon, the chill of the mountain night would set in, and if he couldn't free her. Yorick refused to complete the thought. He assessed the situation with the practicality of a man accustomed to the wilderness. The boulder pinning her was too large for him to move alone, but perhaps he could create enough space to pull her free. He worked quickly, gathering smaller rocks to use as levers, searching for anything that might give him an advantage against the crushing weight of the boulder. As he worked, he spoke to the unconscious woman, his voice steady and reassuring. "Don't you worry, miss, I've got you. Name's Yorick Montgomery. I work at the Double R ranch down in the valley. Been out here tracking a big cat that's been troubling the herd." He grunted as he wedged a sturdy branch under the edge of the boulder. "Not sure what brought you out this far alone, but we'll sort that out once you're free." The woman remained silent, her breathing shallow. Yorick's concern grew as he noticed the pallor of her skin in the fading light. Night was approaching faster than he'd like, and with it, the dangers of the wilderness would multiply. After several failed attempts to create enough leverage, Yorick sat back on his heels, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cooling air. This wasn't working. He needed a new plan. "I'm not leaving you," he promised the still form before him, "but I need to think." He looked up the slope to where his horse waited, then back to the woman. If he rode for help, it would take hours to return with men and equipment, hours she might not have. The temperature was already dropping, and shock and blood loss were real dangers. "No," he decided aloud. "We're getting out of this together." With renewed determination, Yorick removed his coat and covered the woman, tucking it carefully around her upper body. Then he began gathering wood for a fire. At the very least, he could keep her warm while he figured out how to free her. As flames began to lick at the kindling, casting flickering light across the rockslide, the woman stirred. A soft moan escaped her lips, and her eyelids fluttered. Yorick was at her side instantly. "Easy now," he said softly, as though speaking to a spooked horse. "You've been in an accident." Lillian's world swam into focus slowly, pain radiating through her body in waves. The first thing she saw was firelight dancing on unfamiliar features, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, concerned eyes the color of a summer storm, and a weathered cowboy hat pushed back on dark hair. "Who?" she began, her voice a rasp. "Yorick Montgomery, madam. Found you pinned under this rockslide. You're hurt but alive, and I aim to keep you that way." Memory flooded back, the ledge collapsing, the terrifying fall, the crushing weight. Panic seized her as she tried to move. "My legs I can't feel, don't try to move," Yorick cautioned, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're trapped under that boulder. I'm working on getting you free, but it's going to take some doing." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes as the reality of her situation became clear. "Am I going to die out here?" she whispered, the cowboy's expression hardened with determination. "Not while I'm breathing, you won't." He offered her his canteen. "Small sips now. What's your name?" Lillian Wells," she managed after wetting her parched lips. "From Silver Creek." Recognition flashed in Yorick's eyes. "The banker's daughter," she nodded weakly. "Father will be frantic when Pepper returns without me." "Your horse." When she nodded again, Yorick continued, "She's still up top, spooked but unharmed." He glanced up the slope. "I could send her back to town with a message, but there's no guarantee she'd go straight there." "She knows the way," Lillian assured him, though speaking was becoming increasingly difficult as pain clouded her thoughts. Yorick studied her face, noting her struggle. "I'll see to it, then write a note and send her off." He hesitated. But first, let me give you something for the pain. I've got a flask of whiskey, not much, but it might help. Lillian would normally have refused such an offer. Proper ladies didn't drink spirits, but propriety seemed absurd given her circumstances. She accepted the flask with trembling fingers, taking a small sip that burned its way down her throat and spread warmth through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, returning the flask. "Rest if you can," Yorick advised, rising to his feet. "I'm going to see about that horse and then get back to figuring out how to move this rock." As he climbed back up the slope, Lillian closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing to combat the waves of pain. She should be terrified, trapped in the wilderness with a stranger as night fell, but somehow, the quiet confidence in Yorick Montgomery's voice had calmed her fears. If she was to die tonight, at least she wouldn't die alone. Yorick returned to find Lillian drifting in and out of consciousness. He had managed to write a hasty note using a pencil stub and a page torn from the small notebook he carried for tracking signs. After tying it securely to the mare's saddle, he'd given the horse a firm slap on the rump, sending her galloping in the direction of Silver Creek. Whether help would come in time was another matter entirely. The temperature continued to drop as darkness settled fully over the mountains. Yorick built up the fire, gathering as much wood as he could find nearby, never straying far from Lillian's side. Her condition worried him. Her breathing had become more labored, and a sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead despite the cold. "Lillian," he called softly, crouching beside her. "I need you to stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first but then finding his face. "Still here," she murmured. "Good, that's good." He adjusted his coat over her. "I've been thinking about this boulder. I can't move it on my own, but I might be able to dig around it, create some space to pull you free." "Why are you doing this?" Lillian asked suddenly. "You don't know me." Yorick paused in his preparations. "Out here, we look after each other. It's how we survive." He offered a small smile. "Besides, I'd be a poor excuse for a man if I left a lady in distress. You could have gone for help, and leave you alone with night coming on and predators about. Not a chance." He pulled a hunting knife from his boot. "Now, I'm going to start digging around you. It might hurt when things shift, but I'll be as careful as I can." Lillian nodded, steeling herself. As Yorick began to scrape away at the earth beneath the edges of the boulder, she distracted herself by studying his face in the firelight. He was older than her, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. His hands, though rough with calluses, moved with surprising gentleness as he worked. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Montgomery," she requested, needing conversation to stay conscious. "Not much to tell," he replied without pausing in his work. "Came west after the war, worked cattle drives in Texas before heading north, been with the Double R for 3 years now." He glanced up at her. "What about you? What brings a banker's daughter out to this lonely stretch of trail?" "Freedom," Lillian admitted, wincing as a jolt of pain shot through her. "Father wants me to marry Henry Blackstone, the new lawyer in town, says it would be a good match." "And you disagree?" "I've seen how he treats his horse," she said simply. "Cruel to animals, cruel to people, that's what my mother always said." Yorick nodded, understanding in his eyes. Wise words. For the next hour, he alternated between digging and checking on Lillian's condition. The work was slow and frustrating, but he began to create a small cavity beneath the boulder. Lillian drifted in and out of awareness, fighting to stay present despite the pain and encroaching cold. "Yorick," she whispered at one point, her voice so faint he had to lean close to hear. "If I don't make it, none of that," he interrupted firmly. "You're going to be fine. Please," she insisted. "If I don't tell my father, I'm sorry for being so willful," and she hesitated. "Thank you for not leaving me to die alone." Something fierce and protective surged in Yorick's chest. "You listen to me, Lillian Wells. You're not dying tonight or any night soon if I have anything to say about it. Now save your strength." He returned to his task with renewed vigor, digging until his hands were raw and bleeding. Finally, he felt he had created enough space to attempt to free her. "I'm going to try to pull you out now," he warned. "It's going to hurt something fierce, but I need you to stay with me." Lillian nodded weakly, gathering what remained of her strength. Yorick positioned himself at her shoulders, getting a firm grip under her arms. "On 3, 1, 2, 3. He pulled steadily, trying to minimize the jerking motion. Lillian cried out, the sound tearing through the night, but he didn't stop. Inch by excruciating inch, he felt her body begin to slide free from beneath the boulder. With a final surge of effort, he pulled her clear, immediately dragging her away from the unstable ground. Lillian's scream faded to whimpering gasps as Yorick gently laid her on level ground near the fire. Her skirts were torn and bloodied, her legs clearly injured, though in the dim light he couldn't assess the full extent of the damage. "You did it," she breathed, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "You got me out." "We did it," he corrected, brushing hair from her forehead. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Lillian Wells." The ghost of a smile touched her lips before her eyes rolled back and she went limp in his arms. "No, no, no," Yorick muttered, checking frantically for a pulse. It was there, but weaker than before. The effort of being freed had taken its toll. Making a swift decision, Yorick gathered Lillian in his arms and began the difficult climb back up the slope, using the rope he'd left in place. It was slow, agonizing work, but failure wasn't an option. By the time he reached the top, his muscles screamed in protest, and sweat soaked his shirt despite the cold night air. Thunder greeted him with a soft nickering, seemingly understanding the gravity of the situation. Yorick carefully arranged Lillian across his saddle, then mounted behind her, cradling her against his chest. "Hang on, Lillian," he murmured against her hair. "Just hang on." With one arm securing her limp form, he urged Thunder into motion, heading down the mountain toward the Double R Ranch. It was closer than Silver Creek, and the ranch's cook, Old Joe, had experience with battlefield injuries from his Army days. The journey seemed endless, each jolt of the horse drawing a moan from Lillian even in her unconscious state. Yorick talked to her continuously, telling her about the stars overhead, the lay of the land, anything to maintain a connection. "See that constellation there?" he said, nodding toward the sky. "That's Cassiopeia, shaped like a W. My ma taught me that when I was just a boy back in Virginia. Said it would always help me find my way home." His voice softened. "You're going to find your way home too, Lillian. I promise you that." Whether his words reached her, he couldn't say, but it comforted him to speak them aloud. As they descended into the valley, the scattered lights of the Double R came into view, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Yorick urged Thunder to a faster pace, relief flooding through him as they approached the main house. Several ranch hands were still awake, gathered around a fire outside the bunkhouse. "Help!" Yorick called as they drew near. "I need help." The men jumped to their feet, rushing toward him as he reined Thunder to a stop. "What happened?" demanded Caleb, the ranch foreman, as Yorick carefully handed Lillian's unconscious form down to waiting arms. "Rockslide up on Eagle Ridge," Yorick explained tersely, dismounting. "She was pinned for hours. Get her inside and fetch Old Joe. And send someone to Silver Creek to tell her father she's been found Banker Wells' daughter." The men moved quickly, carrying Lillian into the main house while one rode off toward town. Yorick followed, unwilling to leave her side now. The ranch owner's wife, Martha Robertson, was already directing the men to place Lillian on a bed in the guest room, her capable hands immediately beginning to assess the young woman's injuries. "She's in a bad way," Martha declared after a preliminary examination. "Broken leg for certain, maybe internal injuries. Joe's coming, but we might need the doctor from town. Send for him," Yorick insisted. "I'll cover the expense if need be." Martha gave him a curious look but nodded. "Hank," she called to one of the hands hovering in the doorway, "ride for Doc Wilson after you've got a fresh horse." As the ranch burst into activity around him, Yorick sank into a chair beside Lillian's bed, exhaustion finally catching up with him. He took her small, cold hand in his, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. "Don't you give up now," he whispered. "Not after everything we've been through." Old Joe arrived, his weathered face grim as he examined Lillian's legs. "Compound fracture of the right tibia," he announced. "Left one's bruised bad but might not be broken. Can't tell about internal bleeding without the doc." He looked up at Yorick. "You did good getting her out, boy. Most men would have left her for dead or gone for help and returned too late." "Wasn't an option," Yorick replied simply. The old cook nodded, understanding passing between them. Well, we need to set this leg before the doc gets here. It'll be painful, even unconscious as she is. Martha, prepare those splints. Yorick, you'll need to hold her down. The next hour was a nightmare of necessary cruelty as old Joe manipulated the broken bone back into alignment. Even in her unconscious state, Lillian moaned and thrashed, requiring all of Yorick's strength to keep her still. By the time they finished bandaging and splinting her leg, his shirt was soaked with sweat and Lillian had fallen into an even deeper unconsciousness. Now we wait, Martha said, wiping blood from her hands. I'll sit with her. No, Yorick said firmly, I'll stay. Martha and old Joe exchanged glances but didn't argue. Call if there's any change, Martha instructed, leading the old cook from the room. Alone with Lillian, Yorick resumed his seat beside the bed, taking her hand once more. In the lamplight, with the dirt washed from her face, her beauty was even more apparent. Delicate features, full lips now pale with shock, long lashes resting against her cheeks. Something protective and fierce stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. I don't know if you can hear me, he said softly, but I'm right here, Lillian. I'm not going anywhere until you open those eyes again. The night stretched on endlessly. Twice, Lillian's breathing became so shallow that Yorick feared she was slipping away, and both times he found himself pleading with her, with God, with anyone who might be listening, to spare her life. By dawn, his eyes burned with exhaustion and unshed tears, but he maintained his vigil, refusing food and rest when Martha returned to check on them. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, the sound of approaching horses announced the arrival of the doctor, and, from the commotion in the yard, Lillian's father as well. Moments later, the bedroom door burst open, and a distinguished man in his 50s rushed in, his face ashen with worry. My daughter, he gasped, eyes fixed on Lillian's still form. Mr. Wells, Yorick acknowledged, rising stiffly from his chair but maintaining his hold on Lillian's hand. The banker barely spared him a glance, moving to the opposite side of the bed to touch Lillian's forehead. What happened? He demanded. How did she end up here? Before Yorick could answer, Doc Wilson entered, bag in hand. Explanations can wait, Jonathan, the doctor said firmly. Let me examine her first. Reluctantly, both men stepped back, allowing the doctor space to work. Yorick used the opportunity to wash his face in the basin by the window, the cold water reviving him somewhat. When he turned back, he found Jonathan Wells studying him intently. You're the one who found her, the banker stated rather than asked. Yes, sir, Yorick Montgomery, hand at the double R. The note tied to Pepper's saddle. That was your doing, Yorick nodded. Hoped she'd make it straight to town. She did. Wells' expression softened slightly. The Robertsons' foreman said you refused to leave her, that you stayed with her all night. Couldn't do otherwise, sir. A complex emotion crossed the older man's face. Gratitude mingled with something harder to define. Before he could respond, Doc Wilson straightened from his examination. She sustained serious injuries, the doctor reported gravely. The leg has been set properly. Good work there, but there's significant bruising across her abdomen that concerns me. She's lost blood and is in shock. He looked between the two men. The next 24 hours will be critical. If she survives them, her chances improve considerably. If, Wells repeated, his voice breaking, I won't lie to you, Jonathan, her condition is precarious. The doctor began unpacking medicines from his bag. I'm going to give her something to help with pain and inflammation, but what she needs most now is rest and careful monitoring. I'll take her home to Silver Creek, Wells decided. Doc Wilson shook his head firmly. Moving her now would be dangerous. She needs to stay here, at least until she's stabilized. The banker looked ready to argue but finally nodded in resignation. Then I'll stay as well. Of course, Yorick agreed. I'll have a room prepared for you. As he turned to leave, Wells' voice stopped him. Mr. Montgomery. Yorick paused at the door. Thank you, the banker said simply, for saving my daughter's life. Yorick nodded once, unable to express the emotions churning within him. Just doing what needed doing, sir. He left the room but didn't go far, finding a bench in the hallway where he could rest while remaining close. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him as his mind replayed the events of the previous day, finding Lillian, her quiet courage, the feel of her hand in his. He'd known her less than a day, yet something about her had wormed its way into his heart. Foolishness, he told himself. She was a banker's daughter, educated and refined. He was just a cowhand with nothing to his name but a good horse and the respect of his employers. Once she recovered, their paths would diverge, never to cross again. The thought brought an unexpected ache to his chest. Hours passed as ranch hands came and went, offering words of encouragement and bringing news that a room had been prepared for Mr. Wells. The banker himself emerged only once, to send a message to Silver Creek that he would be staying at the Double R until Lillian could be moved. Late in the afternoon, as Yorick dozed fitfully on the bench, the door to Lillian's room opened and Doc Wilson emerged, looking weary but cautiously optimistic. "She's awake," the doctor announced, asking for the man who saved her. Yorick was on his feet instantly, heart pounding. "She's going to be all right. She's not out of danger yet," Wilson cautioned, but showing signs of improvement. "Her father's with her now, but she was quite insistent about seeing you." A knowing look crossed the doctor's face. "Don't tire her, 5 minutes, no more." Nodding his understanding, Yorick entered the room. Jonathan Wells sat beside the bed, holding his daughter's hand, but rose when Yorick appeared. "I'll give you a moment," the banker said, surprising Yorick with his consideration. "Don't overexert yourself, Lillian." As her father left, Yorick approached the bed hesitantly. Lillian was propped up slightly on pillows, her face pale but her eyes a striking shade of green he hadn't fully appreciated in the firelight, alert and fixed on him. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "Said I wouldn't leave until you were breathing proper again," he reminded her, taking the chair her father had vacated. "How are you feeling?" "Like I fell down a mountain," she attempted to joke, though it ended in a wince. "The doctor says you saved my life." Yorick shook his head. "You saved your own life with your determination. I just helped a bit." A small smile touched her lips. "More than a bit, I think." She reached for his hand and he gave it willingly. "Thank you, Yorick, not just for pulling me free, but for staying with me. For talking to me even when I couldn't respond." Surprise flickered across his features. "You heard me, pieces," she admitted. "Like a dream, your voice was my anchor when everything else was slipping away." Her fingers tightened around his. "I don't think I would have made it without that." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection deeper than words could express. Yorick felt it like a physical sensation, warm and real in his chest. "Well," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm glad it helped." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Lillian spoke again. "Father says once I'm well enough to travel, he's taking me back to Silver Creek, that I'll need weeks of recovery. He's right about that. That leg won't bear weight for some time." She looked down at their joined hands. "Will you come visit while I'm recovering?" The request caught him off guard. Would that be proper? A cowhand calling on the banker's daughter? "After what we've been through together, I think propriety can make some allowances," she replied with a hint of her earlier spirit. "Besides, I'd like to get to know the man who refused to leave me for dead properly." Before Yorick could respond, Doc Wilson returned, firmly announcing that his patient needed rest. Reluctantly, Yorick rose, gently releasing Lillian's hand. "Rest well, Miss Wells," he said formally, aware of the doctor's presence. "Lillian," she corrected softly. "After everything, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." Yorick smiled, tipping his hat. "Lillian, then, I'll check on you tomorrow if your father permits it." As he left the room, Yorick felt lighter than he had in years, despite his exhaustion. She was going to live, and somehow, against all odds, she wanted to see him again. The next week passed in a blur of activity at the Double R. Lillian continued to improve, though slowly. Her father divided his time between his daughter's bedside and riding into Silver Creek to attend to his business affairs. Yorick returned to his duties around the ranch, but found himself drawn to the main house whenever he could spare a moment. At first, his visits were brief and somewhat formal, with either her father or Martha Robertson usually present. But as Lillian grew stronger, she insisted on being moved to the porch during fine weather, where she could enjoy the fresh air and watch the activities of the ranch. It was during these times that Yorick and Lillian truly began to know one another. He would join her during his breaks, sometimes bringing small gifts, wildflowers from the meadow, a book borrowed from Mrs. Robertson's collection, or simply stories from his day's work. "Tell me about the East," she requested one golden afternoon as they sat together on the porch. "Father says you're from Virginia originally." Yorick nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Born and raised outside Richmond on a small farm. Nothing grand like some of those old plantations, just enough land to grow what we needed and a bit more to sell." "And your family, are they still there?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, lost my father before the war to pneumonia. My mother and younger sister died when Richmond fell fire took our home while I was away fighting." He stared out at the distant mountains. There was nothing to go back to when it was over. Lillian's hand found his, her touch gentle. "I'm sorry, Yorick, I shouldn't have pried." "It's all right," he assured her, managing a small smile. "Been a long time now. What about you? Your father mentioned your mother passed on." 5 years ago, Lillian confirmed. "Influenza, it was just the two of us after that, and father became protective, sometimes too much so." She sighed. "I love him dearly, but he sees me as a child still, someone to be guided and managed." "Is that why you were out riding alone that day, seeking some freedom?" Her green eyes met his, surprised by his perception. "Yes, exactly. Those rides were the only times I felt truly myself, not defined by others' expectations." She gestured to her splinted leg. "Though perhaps father's caution was warranted given the results." "Accidents happen," Yorick said simply. "Can't live your life in fear of them." As the days passed, these conversations grew longer and more personal. Yorick found himself sharing thoughts and memories he'd kept locked away for years, his experiences during the war, his dreams of someday having his own small ranch, his love of poetry that he'd kept hidden from the other hands for fear of their teasing. In turn, Lillian spoke of her childhood in St. Louis before her family moved west, her passion for teaching that her father considered an unsuitable profession for a woman of her standing, and her secret hope to someday travel to places she'd only read about in books. Jonathan Wells observed their growing closeness with a mixture of gratitude and concern. One evening, as Yorick prepared to return to the bunkhouse after dinner at the main house, a privilege Martha had begun insisting upon, the banker asked him to step into the study for a private word. "You've been spending a great deal of time with my daughter, Mr. Montgomery," Wells began, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey and offering one to Yorick. "Yes, sir," Yorick acknowledged, accepting the drink but not taking a seat. "I hope that hasn't been an imposition. On the contrary. Your company seems to speed her recovery." Wells studied him over the rim of his glass. "But I find myself wondering about your intentions." Yorick took a careful sip before answering. "Mr. Wells, I respect your daughter greatly. Our friendship has been a privilege I never expected." "Friendship," the banker repeated, a hint of skepticism in his tone. "Is that all you seek?" The directness of the question caught Yorick off guard. He could have offered platitudes or denials, but something in the older man's gaze demanded honesty. "Sir, I'd be lying if I said I didn't care for Lillian as more than a friend," he admitted. "But I'm also aware of the differences in our stations. I'm a working man with little to offer a woman like her." Wells set down his glass, his expression unreadable. "You know, when I first came west, I was little more than a bank clerk with grand ambitions. My wife's father, a successful merchant, thought me beneath her." A wry smile touched his lips. "Yet she saw something in me worth believing in, and together we built a good life." He fixed Yorick with a penetrating look. "I've made inquiries about you, Mr. Montgomery. Your employer speaks highly of your character and work ethic. The foreman says you've been saving to buy land of your own someday." Yorick nodded, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "My daughter has a mind of her own," Wells continued. "Always has, much like her mother. Before this accident, I was pushing her toward a match with Henry Blackstone, thought his position as a lawyer would provide her security." He sighed heavily. "But these past days have reminded me of what truly matters. She could have died out there, alone and afraid. Instead, she lives because of your courage and determination." The banker moved to the window, looking out at the gathering darkness. "I won't stand in the way of her happiness, Mr. Montgomery, but neither will I see her struggle unnecessarily." He turned back to face Yorick. If your intentions toward my daughter are honorable, you'll find I can be a generous ally rather than an obstacle." Stunned by the unexpected turn of the conversation, Yorick struggled to find an appropriate response. "Sir, I haven't presumed to that is, Lillian and I haven't discussed." Wells raised a hand, stopping his stammering. "I'm not asking for declarations or promises tonight. Only honesty and respect both for my daughter and for yourself." He picked up his glass again. "Think on what I've said, that's all I ask." Yorick left the study with his mind reeling. The banker's words had opened possibilities he'd barely allowed himself to consider. That night, sleep eluded him as he stared at the bunkhouse ceiling, weighing hopes against practicalities, dreams against realities. By morning, he'd reached a decision. Before beginning his regular duties, he sought out Mr. Robertson, the ranch owner, requesting a private conversation. What passed between them remained confidential, but Yorick emerged from the meeting with a determined set to his shoulders and a plan taking shape in his mind. For the next several days, Yorick's visits to Lillian became shorter though no less warm. He explained his absence as necessary work that needed completion before winter set in, and while she accepted this explanation, Lillian couldn't help noticing a new energy about him, as though he was working toward something important. 2 weeks after the accident, Doc Wilson declared Lillian well enough to make the journey back to Silver Creek. The internal bruising had healed, and while her leg would need several more weeks in splints, the danger of complications had passed. "We'll leave tomorrow morning," Jonathan Wells announced after consulting with the doctor. "I've arranged for a wagon with a mattress for comfort during the ride." Lillian received the news with mixed emotions. While she missed her home, the Double R had become a place of healing and discovery. Most of all, she dreaded the distance it would place between her and Yorick. That evening, as she sat on the porch watching her last sunset at the ranch, Yorick joined her, carrying a small wooden box. "I hear you're heading home tomorrow," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Yes," she confirmed, unable to hide the hint of sadness in her voice. "Father's eager to have me back in Silver Creek. Can't blame him for that." Yorick turned the box over in his hands, seemingly nervous. "I brought you something, a going-away present of sorts." He handed her the box, and Lillian opened it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a delicately carved wooden eagle in flight, its wings spread wide and every feather meticulously detailed. "Yorick," she breathed, lifting it gently. "Did you make this?" He nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. "Been working on it in the evenings. Thought you might like a reminder of where we met, not the Rockslide part, but the eagles soaring above the valley." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes as she traced the smooth curves of the carving. "It's beautiful. I'll treasure it always." "There's something else," Yorick said, his voice growing serious. "Something I need to ask you before you leave." Lillian's heart quickened as she carefully returned the eagle to its box. "Yes," Yorick took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I've spoken with Mr. Robertson about my future here at the ranch. He's offered me a position as assistant foreman starting next month when Caleb moves on to his brother's place in Montana." "Yorick, that's wonderful news," Lillian exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. "It comes with better pay and a small cabin of my own on the property," he continued. "Not much, but a start toward something more substantial." His eyes met hers, intense and hopeful. "I was hoping, really, if you might allow me to call on you properly once you're settled back home." The request hung in the air between them, its significance unmistakable. This wasn't just about friendly visits, it was about courtship, about possibilities neither had dared voice aloud during their time together. "Yes," Lillian answered without hesitation, her heart soaring. "I'd like that very much." Relief and joy transformed Yorick's features. For a moment it seemed he might reach for her hand, but footsteps approaching from inside the house made him hesitate. "Saturday," he said quickly, rising as Jonathan Wells appeared in the doorway. "I'll ride into town on Saturday if that suits." "Saturday would be perfect," Lillian confirmed, clutching the wooden box to her chest as her father joined them on the porch. The journey back to Silver Creek the following day was long and uncomfortable, despite the preparations made to ease Lillian's travel. Throughout the trip, she held the carved eagle in her lap, a tangible reminder of the man who had saved her life and, perhaps, her heart as well. News of Lillian's accident and miraculous rescue had spread throughout the small town, and upon her return, she found herself the object of much concern and curiosity. Visitors streamed to the Wells home, bringing food, flowers, and thinly veiled questions about the handsome cowboy who had found her. Henry Blackstone was among the callers, his solicitous manner failing to mask his displeasure when he learned of Yorick's imminent visit. A ranch hand, he remarked with poorly disguised disdain after Lillian mentioned her plans for Saturday. Your father allows such familiarity after your ordeal. My father recognizes that I owe Mr. Montgomery my life, Lillian replied coolly, and I consider him a friend, regardless of his profession. The lawyer's mouth tightened. Friends are well and good, my dear, but a lady in your position must consider the future. Your father and I have discussed, my father and I have also discussed my future, Lillian interrupted, her patience wearing thin. And we've agreed that I should follow my heart in such matters. Blackstone left shortly thereafter, his pride visibly wounded. Lillian felt a momentary twinge of guilt for her bluntness, but it was overshadowed by the anticipation of Saturday's arrival. When that day finally came, Lillian spent the morning in a state of nervous excitement, changing her dress twice before settling on a simple blue gown that matched the color of the sky on the day they'd met. With her leg still splinted, she was confined to a chair in the parlor, but she'd arranged it near the window where she could watch the street for Yorick's approach. He arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, riding thunder and dressed in what were clearly his best clothes: a clean dark shirt, new-looking trousers, and a jacket that had been carefully brushed. His hat, usually dusty from the trail, had been shaped and cleaned as well. Jonathan Wells greeted him at the door with unexpected warmth, ushering him into the parlor where Lillian waited. The moment Yorick entered, the nervousness that had plagued her all morning vanished, replaced by a calm certainty that felt like coming home. You look well, he said, taking the seat Mr. Wells offered him. Town life agrees with you. It's good to be home, Lillian acknowledged, though I find myself missing the view from the ranch sometimes. Her father excused himself after a few minutes of polite conversation, leaving them alone together, a liberty that raised eyebrows among some of Silver Creek's more traditional residents when word inevitably spread, but one that Jonathan Wells seemed determined to grant them. They talked easily, picking up where they had left off at the ranch. Yorick shared news of his promotion and the plans he was making for his new position. Lillian told him about the books she'd been reading during her convalescence and her growing determination to pursue teaching once she was fully recovered. Father's finally coming around to the idea, she explained. He says if it's truly what I want, he won't stand in my way. He's a good man, Yorick observed, wants your happiness above all else. Yes, Lillian agreed softly. I'm beginning to understand that better now. She hesitated, then added, he speaks highly of you, you know, says you remind him of himself at your age, determined and hardworking. A pleased flush colored Yorick's cheeks. High praise indeed. When it came time for him to leave, Yorick paused at the door, his expression suddenly serious. May I return next Saturday? I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Lillian replied honestly. Something shifted in his gaze, a warmth that made her breath catch. Until then, he said, tipping his hat in farewell. As autumn deepened toward winter, Yorick's Saturday visits became a cherished routine. Sometimes they drove through town in a buggy borrowed from Mr. Wells, Lillian's splinted leg carefully propped up. Other times, when the weather turned harsh, they sat by the fire in the Wells parlor, reading to each other or simply talking for hours. By December, Lillian was walking with only the aid of a cane, her recovery progressing faster than even Doc Wilson had predicted. With her increased mobility came greater freedom, and she began accompanying Yorick on longer outings to church on Sundays, to community gatherings where they danced the slow dances that didn't tax her healing leg, even once to the Double R for dinner with the Robertsons. Throughout it all, their connection deepened, transforming from the intense bond formed during crisis to something more enduring and profound. They discovered shared values, complementary dreams, and a way of being together that felt both comfortable and exhilarating. On Christmas Eve, With snow falling gently outside the Wells home, Yorick arrived for dinner carrying 2 packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. The larger one contained a beautiful leather-bound journal for Lillian, the cover embossed with her initials. "For all those stories you want to write someday," he explained as she ran her fingers over the smooth leather. The second package, much smaller, he didn't present immediately. It remained in his pocket through dinner and the pleasant hours of conversation that followed, until Jonathan Wells tactfully retired early, leaving them alone by the fireplace. "I have something else for you," Yorick said quietly once they were alone. "Something I've been carrying around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." From his pocket, he withdrew the small package, placing it in Lillian's hands. With trembling fingers, she untied the string and carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box similar to the one that had held the eagle carving. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a ring, a simple gold band with a small, perfect diamond that caught the firelight. "It's not grand," Yorick said softly as Lillian stared at it in wonder. "Nothing like what a lawyer or banker might offer, but it comes with a promise that every day of your life you'll be cherished and respected, your dreams honored alongside mine." He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Lillian Wells, when I found you beneath that rockslide, I had no idea I was also finding my future, my heart. These past months have shown me what kind of woman you are: brave, intelligent, kind, and stronger than anyone I've ever known." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Lillian's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she found her voice, it was clear and certain. "Yes, Yorick, yes, with all my heart." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a gentle embrace, their first kiss sweet with promise and sealed with shared tears of joy. The wedding took place the following spring, when wildflowers dotted the hillsides and Lillian could walk down the aisle of Silver Creek's small church without any trace of a limp. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, along with the hands from the Double R and friends from neighboring settlements. Jonathan Wells gave away his daughter with proud tears in his eyes, having come to love Yorick like the son he'd never had. The Robertsons sat in places of honor, Mrs. Robertson dabbing at her eyes throughout the service. After exchanging their vows, Yorick and Lillian departed amid cheers and well wishes, riding away in a flower-decked buggy toward their new home, a small but sturdy cabin on land that Jonathan Wells had helped Yorick purchase, just outside of Silver Creek. It was only the beginning of their journey together. In the years that followed, the small homestead grew into a prosperous ranch of their own. Lillian divided her time between helping manage their growing operation and teaching at the town school she helped establish. Yorick's skills with horses became legendary throughout the territory, bringing clients from as far away as Denver. Their family grew as well, first with twins, a boy and girl who inherited their mother's green eyes and their father's quiet determination, then with a second son who arrived 3 years later. Their home became known for its warmth and hospitality, a place where travelers were always welcome and no one in need was ever turned away. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Yorick surprised Lillian with a special gift, a framed map of the territory with a gold star marking the exact spot of the rockslide. "Some might think it strange to commemorate such a dangerous moment," he said as she examined it, "but I've always believed that day was a blessing in disguise." "As have I," Lillian agreed, leaning into his embrace, "though perhaps we could have found each other without quite so much drama." Yorick laughed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Where would be the story in that? Besides, I meant what I promised that day. I wasn't going to leave until you breathed again, and I plan to keep that promise for all our days." "All our days," Lillian echoed, turning in his arms to meet his lips with hers, the love between them as strong and enduring as the mountains that had brought them together. In the years that followed, their story became something of a legend in Silver Creek, the tale of a brave young woman and the steadfast cowboy who refused to leave her side. But for Yorick and Lillian Montgomery, it was simply the beginning of a life built on courage, resilience, and a love that, like the carved eagle that still sat on their mantle, soared above all obstacles, wings spread wide and free against the endless western sky.